Some things happen without explanation. Some experiences haunt people for a lifetime. This is where I tell those mysteries. And remember, not everything can be explained. Story. I bought an old doll as a birthday gift. Now it's speaking to me and it knows the truth. I don't know what to make of all this. It all seems impossible. Last week I was just looking to buy a gift for my mom, and now I am reeling at the revelation that spirits could be real. Worse still, that they could be merciful, malevolent, and everything in between. I have to try and determine if the spirit I found, if indeed it really is one, is helpful or harmful. From what I have seen so far, the truth of the answer is connected to the truth itself, or rather one's ability to preserve it. I will tell you the truth of what I found, and maybe you can help me figure out what I should do with this thing. This doll that spoke to me. I have to do something. Because the more I learn about its true nature, the more dangerous it seems. It began with a simple task. I was out looking for a last-minute gift for my mom's birthday. I should not have waited as long as I had, and I was running out of time. I had a very busy work schedule and did not have much time to look for something. Every time I ordered online for her gifts, I could tell she was a bit disappointed. She had very eclectic tastes, and I knew she would appreciate a more thoughtful gift that I had picked out in person, rather than ordered from Amazon. To that end, I resolved to check some of the antique shops and other outlets near where she lived. It was a small town, and I was not sure what I would find. But I figured it would be better to check there and find something, rather than going to a larger store for something more generic. After striking out at a few locations, I found one that looked interesting. The place was called True Antique. It seemed like just the right kind of store to find something she would like. I stepped inside and was assailed by a musty smell, mixed with the faint aroma of mothballs. I wondered if it had been a while since they cleaned up, since everything seemed a bit stagnant. Antiques, I figured, are supposed to be a bit old and musty. Not out of place, I guessed, and the old smell was fitting, if not a little difficult to stomach. I moved into the store and began looking around. I found a few trinkets here and there, but nothing stood out at first. Then I saw they had a selection of old-timey porcelain dolls. My mother had a collection of those since she was a child, but she lost most of them at some point in the past and only had a handful left. I knew this was something that she would like, so I grabbed one of the two that were on the shelf. The doll had a fine layer of dust on it. I brushed it off and examined the features. It wore a miniature Victorian-era blue dress and had light brown hair and a well-painted but almost stern-looking face. As I held the doll, I felt a strange sensation of my mind wandering. I almost fell into a fugue-like state for a moment, like I had suddenly become so lost in thought that I might just stand there for hours before I found myself again. I broke out of my stupor and considered putting the doll back. Something about holding it made me feel strange. I looked at the other doll. It wore a frayed yellow dress and had curly red hair. Its face had an almost pained expression, along with a hairline crack that made it a bit less appealing. At that point I had decided my mother's favorite color was blue, so I pushed back my earlier reservation and decided to buy the one with the blue dress after all. I walked up to the front of the store, and an older woman with white hair and thick glasses approached me from behind the counter. She placed both hands on the counter and looked me up and down. Then she adjusted her glasses and spoke. "Ah yes. Let's see what you have there, my friend. Oh yes. That little one is a beauty. To be honest, it can be a bit of trouble." She slapped her knee and laughed at the statement and chortled for a few moments longer. I had no idea what was so funny about the word honest, or how a doll could be trouble. For a moment I was worried this lady had a name and backstory for these dolls that I would have to sit through, or some history lesson I did not have time to take in. She must have seen the confused and concerned look on my face, and she composed herself and continued. "Yes, well, sorry about that. Anyway, I am sure you and Matilda will hit it off. A truer friend there never was. At least if you can handle that truth. And of course if you treat her right." She was nodding her head at her own words as if she was not even talking to me. I was starting to get the impression this shopkeeper did not get many customers, because she seemed a bit awkward with people. She suddenly turned back to look at me, almost as if she remembered I was there and she was not talking to herself, and flatly said, "That will be $115. Would you like a bag?" I balked at the price and was about to try and haggle when she read my intention and immediately spoke again. "She is a very rare and very valuable antique, though I will admit she did cause some trouble for the last people who bought her. So just for you I will let her go for $80. That is my final offer though. I have to make ends meet after all." She smiled again, though not at me but at the doll on the counter. The whole encounter was feeling a bit creepy, but I figured I would take the offered discount and get out of there. I agreed to the bag, and the shopkeeper reverently wrapped the doll up and warned me to be careful. She is as fragile as some people's self-image and as free-spirited and open as the truth. I thanked her and left, pondering more of the strange words she had mentioned about the doll. I thought just then that I would spare my mom the weird backstory and just give her the doll for her collection. If they were supposed to have some personality, I could always direct her to the store so she could talk over the doll's backstory with the odd shopkeeper there. I made it back home and spent a bit of time getting some housework done. It was getting late at that point, and I was getting ready to turn in for the night. I was going to wrap the doll in a nicer box or bag, but I did not have the energy just then, so I decided to get some sleep. I looked at my phone and saw it was almost dead. I also saw I had a notification that the new phone charger I had ordered arrived. Before going to bed, I checked my porch for the package that was supposed to have been delivered from Amazon. I saw it was missing and I cursed out loud and sighed. This kept happening. I swore whoever was stealing my packages was going to get what was coming to them. I went back inside and heard an odd sound. It almost sounded like singing. It was coming from the room where I had placed the doll. But when I walked in to check, there was no sound at all. I stood there in silence, questioning my mental state. As I waited, I heard another sound, almost like someone whispering something. I could not quite make it out, but it sounded like someone trying to say something, just very faintly or very far away. I looked around, trying to see if I could find the source of the odd whispers. Then I realized the most likely scenario was the most obvious. It must be the doll. The doll must have had a voice box or something. I did not think porcelain dolls could speak, but it would not be impossible to hook one up with a voice box so they could. I pulled the doll out of the bag and looked it over once again. I was not certain, but it almost seemed like its expression had softened and it had the hint of a smile on its face, where before it had looked moody and slightly upset. I brushed off what was likely me just not remembering how its face really looked earlier and tried to inspect the thing for a string, button or some device that could be linked to an audio box. I looked around for a few minutes with no luck. Then I tried something I did not suspect would work, but gave it a shot all the same. I said out loud, "Hello." There was a long pause. Just long enough for me to feel silly for trying to talk to the thing. I was about to put it back when I was shocked and completely freaked out when a voice did respond. "Hello. My name is Matilda. Nice to meet you." The response itself was not what had bothered me. What made me concerned and uneasy was the response had not come from an audio box in the doll. The response seemed to come from no obvious source at all. In fact, it seemed like it had just popped into my own mind, like a thought that had been willed into my own brain from another entity entirely. The intrusive thought, greeting, almost made me jump in surprise and drop the doll. I tried to compose myself and investigate the phenomenon further. I summoned the conviction to return the greeting to the small figure. "Hello, Matilda." There was another short pause and then, again, the response seemed to come into my mind without any real audio cue in the quiet room. "Will you be my friend?" I was stunned by the telepathic discourse I was having with a tiny doll. I considered I might be hallucinating, but I had no idea what could be causing these type of vivid and intrusive voices if I was. I also felt uneasy at the fact that the voice was in my head and yet was clearly not my own mind. I spent so long contemplating my own sanity that suddenly I looked back at the doll and its painted face had shifted again. Now there was a look of profound sadness on it and I realized I had not answered its question. I figured I would play along and told the odd thing. Yes, of course I will be your friend." The answer was almost immediate that time and I heard the voice practically shout back into my head. "Great. That is so great. Thank you. I promise I will be a true friend to you. If you are always true to me, I can see many things. But I will not look into you, only speak to you, because you are my friend and I trust you." The doll had some interesting perspectives and I had to learn more while the psychic conversation was still ongoing. I was so fascinated that I resolved to keep talking, at least until I hopefully woke up from the bizarre dream I must have been having. I asked the most pertinent questions first. "I am sorry to be so direct, Matilda, but what are you? Are you a spirit, a demon, or some other thing that could inhabit the body you currently possess?" There was another long pause and I wondered if she was thinking about how to respond. I started to worry, since I had seen too many scary stories of haunted dolls. I did not believe strongly in the supernatural, but it would be just my luck to find a doll possessed by some soul-devouring demon. She had finally come up with her answer and she replied, "I am me, just Matilda. I think. I do not know what I am besides a doll. I think I have always been this way. I remember having a sister and she was a doll as well. I also remember someone else, but it is blurry. My memory about myself is not the best. I remember it is my job to see things in others, to see the truth and to help my friends." I felt a bit better at the benign response. No overtly evil behavior to fret over. I chuckled to myself at the absurdity and impossibility of the situation. I must have just found one of the more run-of-the-mill psychic porcelain dolls. The insane conversation was cut short when I heard loud music start from next door, and I groaned out loud as the crazy situation was affected by a more mundane annoyance. My neighbor was at it again. Every Sunday he had people over and played music so loud and so late it kept me from getting to sleep till well after midnight. I worked an early shift Monday morning, and no matter how many times I told him to try and keep it down, he just kept at it. He would pretend to listen to placate me, or just ignore me completely. I called the cops one time. It was particularly bad, and he has been more hostile to me ever since then. I sighed and was not sure what I would do this time. I had to get up even earlier than normal since I had to get the flowers for my mom's birthday tomorrow. My frustration was interrupted by a soft voice gentling, prodding into my annoyed mind again. "What's wrong, my friend? You seem upset." I was surprised and then remembered I had been talking to a sentient doll again. I figured I had asked my questions of her, so I may as well share my frustrations with her as well. Why not, since now she was apparently a friend? It's my neighbor. I have to get up early tomorrow, and he is always inconsiderate on Sundays with the noise. He has parties over there with extremely loud music till well after midnight. I am just tired and I need to get some sleep. Matilda replied with a request. "Would you bring me over there? Maybe I can help." I almost laughed out loud at the prospect of bringing the psychic talking doll I had bought as a gift for my mom's birthday over to my neighbor's house to tell him to keep it down so I could get some sleep. My dismissive tone was noticeable, and I swear I saw her look sad again. I decided if I was already in a crazy dream, what could it hurt to indulge the curious new friend of mine? I walked over towards my neighbor's house, still in my robe and sweatpants, holding the doll in one arm against my chest with her face pointing out, like a ventriloquist that had just rolled out of bed. Before we made it to the door, Matilda spoke into my mind again. "This is close enough. Thank you. Please wait a moment." I stood there on my neighbor's lawn, confused and still holding the doll, which was physically there, but somehow felt absent at that moment. I was embarrassed and hoped nobody would open a window just then and see me standing there looking like a lunatic. The music had stopped, and I was afraid that it was because they knew someone was outside. But I heard nothing indoors at first. Then after a moment I heard shouting, and there was some sort of argument going on indoors. I was about to get closer to check when I heard the familiar voice speaking into my mind again. "Your neighbor is a liar. I don't like liars. So many secrets, deceptions, lies." I looked and I saw things. He kept the relationship with another woman hidden from his girlfriend. She knows now. She is not happy. She will leave soon, and he will either follow her or sulk. He will not feel like partying for the rest of the night. My friend should have some peace and quiet for the remainder of the night. I was astounded by the doll's declaration. I could not believe it. But when I inched closer to the window, I heard shouts and screams of an obvious argument between my neighbor and his girlfriend. "She is just a work friend. It's not what you think. Come on, Cindy. Really? You are just gonna leave over a misunderstanding?" A loud slap was heard after his appeal, and an icy response of, "Fuck you, Glenn." Then the front door swung open, and I fell back and toward the side of the house to not be seen standing there listening in on the exchange. After a moment of sitting there in the grass by the window, I was unsure if I should stand up and leave, or stay a moment longer. Then I heard more coming from inside. I heard objects breaking and yells of anger, followed promptly by sobbing as my neighbor Glenn went through the entire emotional range of getting dumped. Though I admitted that it sounded like he deserved it. Then I considered my situation. I had to ask the immediate follow-up question to my companion and looked down at the doll I was still holding. Matilda's painted face now wore a wicked smile, and she was clearly proud of what she had done. I had no idea just how she had done it. I asked her directly, "What was that? What did you do exactly?" She replied instantly, "I just told the truth. I told her the truth. Glenn is a bad man. He lies a lot. He is also a thief. In his garage are 3 boxes. All of them are deliveries that were dropped off at my friend's house. He stole them from you. You should get them back." I was speechless. I could not believe the doll had done so much and could see and manipulate so much around her. I was fumbling for a response when I heard the garage door open and I saw my neighbor's car exit the garage. Matilda was right, he was going after his now ex-girlfriend. When the car left, I had an idea and I raced to the side of the garage, and after he had driven off, I snuck under the door before it closed. I had to know for sure. Matilda was right. 3 Amazon boxes lay in a corner, all addressed to me. I don't know why he had taken them. Maybe just to spite me for calling the cops that one time. Whatever the case, I had no idea how she had known about that. Could this doll read and influence people's minds as well as talk into them? Whatever the case, I was dumbfounded and just managed to mumble a response of, "Thanks. Thank you, Matilda." I looked down at the doll and her eyes were closed and a large grin was on her face. Her voice came back into my mind with an acknowledgement of, "Anything for my friend. Also, if you would like, I could do more. Now that I have looked inside, I can reach him. Based on his current emotional state and the doubts he has about his life goals and aspirations, there is a good likelihood that I could influence him to crash his car in a fatal manner and remove him as a nuisance completely. Would that make you happy, my friend?" My jaw hung open and my heart sank as I processed what I had just heard. I looked down at the doll with dawning horror at the brutal suggestion it had just directed into my mind. The wide smile never left its face, and I remembered the trouble that the shopkeeper had mentioned with the doll's previous owners. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. I tried to calm my mind and not let the horror and implication of Matilda's suggestion color my response. I did not know what she was capable of just then, but I feared if I disappointed her, she would turn her power on me just then. I told her flatly, "No, that will not be necessary. I got my boxes back and it is quiet. Thank you again, Matilda. I think I need to have a drink and lay down for a bit. Hopefully I will not wake up in a room with padded walls and find out I am as crazy as this night seems to indicate." I walked back to my house and went inside, retiring for the night with my new friend. I went back inside my own house and put Matilda on the table in the dining room and started towards my bedroom. I heard the voice in the back of my head. It sounded distant. Then I heard a soft voice that seemed sad and a little embarrassed. It asked, "Did I do something wrong? You looked concerned. Are you afraid of me?" I was shocked but also not surprised by the question. I remembered I had sworn to be honest, so I had to tell her. "Yes, I am a little afraid right now. I'm sorry. I just was not expecting all the things you can apparently do. I just need a moment." There was a pause and then an acknowledgement. "Oh, all right. Well, sleep well, friend. I will speak with you tomorrow." The voice faded away, and it seemed she had returned to a dormant state. She sat silently on the table I had set her on, and after a minute of waiting I heard no more attempts at communication. I walked back to my room and shut the door and sat on my bed trying to process the insanity of the day. I could not believe the situation I had found myself in. But I knew one thing. I could not give her away right now. I had no idea how she might react if I tried to give her to my mom. Worse, I did not know if it would even be safe to do so. When I was finally able to quiet my mind, I eventually fell asleep. I remember having vivid dreams of being small and sitting on a giant shelf with giant people walking around. I could hear them speak, but I could also hear them think. The din of voices increased and threatened to drive me mad, before I finally managed to shut them out by some force of will. I thought as well about her. I did not know who she was, but a word kept cropping up in my jumbled thoughts as I tossed and turned. Ruby. Who was Ruby? I woke up to my alarm blaring. I was exhausted and felt like I had hardly gotten any rest. I shot upright as I realized I had to try and find a replacement gift for my mom today. I was not going to give her Matilda, but that meant I had to find something else before I met her in the morning for breakfast. I got ready and raced to the door. I did not even know what would be open this early, but I had to find something thoughtful in less than an hour. As I was leaving, I felt something tugging at my mind, and I realized Matilda was trying to get my attention. Apparently, she wanted to go, even though I was not giving her as a gift. I told her, "I don't think it is a good idea. I am going to see my mom, and she might get freaked out by your abilities." There was a considerate pause, and her voice gently prodded into my mind. "I promise I won't speak to her. You can even keep me in a backpack or something if you are embarrassed. I just don't want to be left alone on a shelf anymore. I would like to go to where my friends go and be ready to help if they need help." I felt bad for her and relented, under the condition that she stay in the backpack. I left and went back downtown to the small run of thrift shops to try and find a last-minute replacement gift. I was lucky and found success on the first store I had tried. I managed to find a pretty music box from a store I had not visited yesterday. Things were looking up, and I rushed back to my car to head to my mom's house. I was stuck at a crosswalk waiting to get to the other side where I had parked. The light changed to walk, and I hurried across and heard a blaring car horn and the squeal of brakes as a bright red sports car stopped just inches before hitting me. The driver was yelling at me and had been trying to turn. Despite the crosswalk signaling that pedestrians were clear to walk, I thought I heard angry ranting of, "Hurry up and cross, you piece of shit." I was confused by the upfront hostility of the man and angrily responded by showing him a particular finger and shouting back, "Learn how to read, asshole. It says walk." To my surprise, he actually gunned the car and drove past me instead of waiting for me to finish crossing, and actually clipped me as he sped off. I was speechless at the overt hostility and brushed myself off and hurried back to my own vehicle. Shaken by the experience, I sat back down in my car and tried to lower my speeding heart rate. A small voice crept into the back of my mind again. "Are you all right?" I felt better for the first time hearing the reassuring voice. The weirdness of talking to the doll was wearing off, and I replied to Matilda, "I am okay. That was just a little too close." I did not open my backpack to look, but I could imagine her face wore a concerned expression, and she replied, "I am sorry that happened. Some people are just terrible. They only care about themselves. The world would be better off without those sorts of people." I felt better at her attempt to sympathize with me, and I made the mistake of answering her just then. "Yeah, you're right. We would all be better off without reckless jerks like that in the world." I started my car and drove off, not even noticing that the presence around the doll was absent for a while afterwards, and never realizing that Matilda was up to something. I arrived at my mom's house and she greeted me warmly, and we went inside. I wished her a happy birthday and gave her the music box I had purchased as a replacement for Matilda. She seemed to really like it, and I could tell I lucked out with the last-minute find. As we spoke, I asked her how she was doing, and she responded with the normal, "Oh, me? Don't worry about me, I am doing just fine." I asked if she was having anyone else over today, and she hesitated briefly and then said, "No, it is just you today. Having a low-key birthday this year. Don't worry about me, sweetie." I did not think anything of the answer at first. Then a familiar voice gently pushed into my mind. "Your mother is lying. She is afraid to tell you that she is still seeing someone named Michael." At first, I tried to push Matilda's voice away. I did not want her reading my mom's thoughts. Then I tensed up when I heard the name Michael. I couldn't believe she was still seeing him. Michael was the first person my mother dated after she separated with my dad. He was an airline pilot when they met, retired now, but in reality, his full-time job was a cheating scumbag. He was one of those good old boys who thought they could have a different woman in every major city. Due to the nature of the job, worse still, despite having a decent job, he was awful with money, and my mom blew a ton of her own savings on him when they were together. My heart sank when I considered they might be together again. Despite her infatuation, the man was probably trying to sink his hooks into her again, because he was blowing his retirement as bad as he was blowing his money when he was working. I knew that a heartbreak was in the near future if this was really happening. Yet, I had no idea how to broker the subject, considering that I learned all this from the psychic doll in my backpack. My mom noticed the silence after she spoke, and she was getting self-conscious about it. Maybe even suspecting I somehow knew what she was saying was a lie. She promptly offered me a cup of tea and stood up and walked out of the living room we were sitting in. I was not sure what to do, but then I realized I also had not responded to Matilda, and she spoke into my mind again. She should not lie to my friend. She acts self-righteous, but she does as much lying as he did, as both of them did. She feels like she can't judge because she cheated on him. On your father. My jaw almost hit the floor, and I was stunned by another, even more significant revelation about my mom, and I was feeling increasingly uncomfortable. I knew that my parents had broken up, but I did not know my mom had cheated on my dad with someone else. I honestly did now want to know that. I reached out with my mind and spoke to Matilda again. "Please do not read my mom's mind. I know you want to help, but it is making me uncomfortable." There was a moment of silence, and then a soft response of, "I am sorry it is making you sad, my friend. I only want to help. If your mother's lies are making you uncomfortable, I can take care of her. That way she will not be able to lie to you anymore." My blood turned to ice in my veins as I realized the threat she had just made about my own mother. Just for lying about her relationship status. I fumbled for a response that struck the right tone. But the response I managed to think of was a more forceful than I first intended. No, absolutely not. Why would you even think that? I immediately felt guilty, but also scared of her response to the mental retort I had just assaulted her with. I had no idea if she might feel anger at me and try to get into my head as retribution. There was a painfully long pause, and I was about to say something else when a meek and sad response came into my mind. I was just trying to help my friend. I do not like it when people lie. But especially not to my friends. I'm sorry. Despite her threat a moment ago, I was surprised when I found myself feeling bad for Matilda and guilty that I had just lashed out at her. Once again, I considered my situation and could not believe I was silently arguing with a porcelain doll. The rest of the visit with my mom was nice. A bit awkward. I did not bring up Michael or my dad, and I left a bit early. My mom looked relieved, and I figured based on the lie from earlier that Michael would be coming over sometime later that day. I said goodbye and got on the road back home. As I was considering what to do about the entire situation, I almost rear-ended the car in front of me. I had to slam on my brakes as I had run into a rather unusual amount of traffic congestion on the way back home. It was not normally a busy road, so I was surprised there would be traffic. Unless there was construction or something slowing things down. This was very strange. Eventually I had inched far enough in the single lane of moving traffic to see what had happened. What I saw I could barely believe. It was the red car that had almost hit me from earlier that day. It was blocking the right lane of traffic and was flipped over on its top. Apparently, it was some sort of accident. Considering the driver, I was not surprised with how reckless he seemed. Yet I saw something else more horrifying. The driver was not in the car. There was a ton of police nearby, and I saw what looked like a crime scene set up in the area. Then I saw what looked like a body bag and knew the likely fate of the man. The whole scene was disturbing. The guy was an asshole. But to die like that was brutal. Then I heard on the news later that evening that it was worse than I first thought. Apparently, the man had randomly assaulted responding officers after flipping his car, and he was shot to death as a result. Witnesses at the scene had said he was raving about the officers knowing the truth about him. They also said that the man had attacked them in order to get them to shoot, saying that we would all be better off without reckless jerks like me in the world. As I read the man's last words, my heart sank and I froze in fear. I thought about what I had said to Matilda, and I looked over to her sitting on the counter and smiling playfully back at me. My mind was racing and I was overwhelmed with anxiety. When I was heading to my room to go to sleep, I finally mustered the will to ask her, "Matilda, I need you to tell me something. What did you do earlier today?" There was a small pause, and I heard what sounded like a tittering laugh followed by a response of, "What I always do. I just showed someone the truth." In this case, the truth was just what my friend had said. We would all be better off without reckless jerks like that in the world. Good night, my friend. Have a good sleep. I pushed back the feeling of apprehension and fear long enough to mutter back a meek, "Good night, Matilda." Then the presence left the room, and I felt a deep feeling of dread at what would happen next if someone else was caught telling lies. I had to think of something to do about my new friend. I woke up to my alarm blaring and I groaned. It was a work day and the return to a bit of normalcy was appreciated. But I was still very tired. I was tempted to hit snooze. But I decided to get up and get going. I had not slept well as I spent much of my night wondering what to do about my new friend. Despite the innocent facade, I worried just what Matilda would be capable of. She was possessed of a childlike innocence and desire to please. Yet she also had a ruthless disregard for human life beyond who she proclaimed were her friends. My concerns had to wait for the moment. I had to get to work. I was preparing a quick breakfast to go when I heard something from the living room. I stepped inside and saw Matilda on the shelf where I had left her. She wore a sad expression and there were strange streaks on her cheeks. Almost like a woman who had too much makeup on was crying and leaving trails on her face. I asked her, "What's wrong, Matilda?" I heard the soft, almost imperceptible whimpering continue for a short moment and then she responded, "Oh, good morning. Well, it's nothing. It's just that it gets very lonely in the dark and on this shelf all by myself at night. I was wondering if maybe I could be in the room with you at night. It would be a lot less scary and it would make me feel better. You don't have to if you don't want. I just think it would be nice." Once again, my reservations of the danger of the psychic doll took a backseat to my sympathy and I felt bad she had been scared. I also felt guilty I had not thought of it earlier and I told her, "Of course, I am sorry I had not thought of that. That would be just fine, Matilda." I heard a strange squeal sound, like the adulation of a young child, and then she spoke again. "You mean it? I promise I won't be any bother." I assured her, "It is fine, yes, but I have to get going to work now. Will you be okay here for a while? At least while I am gone?" I was surprised I was asking, and I found, despite my previous concerns, that I was genuinely considering her feelings before acting. There was a sound like mumbling and then another soft appeal. "Well, if it would be all right. I thought I might tag along and maybe stay in your backpack. You could talk to me on your breaks and then I would not have to be alone here with all the voices." I was not sure about that request. I was worried what might happen if Matilda got any ideas about my coworkers telling lies, and how they should be punished accordingly. I was about to decline her request when I looked back up from my contemplation and saw her face had shifted to a design of hopeful anticipation. Her eyes were bright and shiny and her smile was wide and waiting. I relented and rather than deny her request, I decided to let her come along. Just this once to my work. I was already forgetting that she had gotten a man killed just yesterday. "Oh, all right, just for today to see how it goes. But please be good." Matilda agreed readily and we were off to work. It was a short drive to my work and I rode on with Matilda riding in my backpack. The back opened and her head poking out so she could see things as we drove. We arrived and I turned back to her and reminded her, "Remember, be good, okay?" I heard something odd that might have been a childlike grumble of acceptance and then a sweet and compliant answer of, "Yes, of course. Thanks again for taking me with you. You are the best friend ever." We stepped inside and I went straight for my desk. I worked as an insurance underwriter for a small industrial insurance company. It paid well, but like all insurance companies, the profit motive was king, and as such, the company was not shy about any tactic to save a buck. The fear of losing our jobs kept a near constant aura of paranoia and suspicion in the office chatter. Chatter which I will admit I partook of from time to time, but often tried to avoid. It would be difficult to ignore any intrigue with a mind-reading doll in my backpack, ready and eager to divulge my coworkers' darkest secrets. I walked straight past James and Kathy talking about something they had been doing on the weekend and avoided direct eye contact with Bridget, who I knew would try and fill me in on the details of who she suspected was on Mr. Langdon's shit list and who might be getting the axe next. As I sat down and booted up my computer, I heard a familiar voice in my ear. "Hey man, how was the weekend?" "Mine was great. I met a new lady friend and let's just say we hit it off big time. If you know what I mean." It was Gary, a very friendly but slightly oversharing person. I sometimes spoke with him about random things, but often I tried to keep my head down at work even before a day like today. I politely responded, as I often did, with an attempt at what the business tried to discourage in sales calls. A close-ended statement. "Just fine, thanks. Glad yours was as well. Have to get to work. Thanks, Gary." Gary shrugged and walked away, and as he left, I heard a murmur in my mind. She was doing it again. Why would your friend pay someone for that? I was confused and asked Matilda. "For what? What do you mean?" There was a pause and Matilda spoke again. "He paid his new friend he was speaking about to do things with him, and then she left and he paid her money. Is that what friends are supposed to do?" I sighed and realized that Matilda had seen Gary's transaction with his new lady friend, and I realized that their meeting was not quite as organic as Gary suggested. Matilda chimed in again and was about to go into more details when I cut her off. "No thank you, Matilda. I don't need to know more about Gary's prostitute." Another delay, and I sighed as I anticipated the next question. "What is a prostitute? Is it a kind of friend?" I don't know why, but I responded in the same way a parent might to an awkward question from their kid by saying, "I'll tell you when you are older. Let's leave it for now." I heard an acknowledgement and I got back to work. After an hour or so I looked up from my computer and saw the face of my boss, Mr. Langdon, leering down at me. He interrupted me by loudly clearing his throat and spoke. "Did you get Kelso account reviewed yet?" He grinned down at me with barely disguised impatience, and I looked at my log for the day and saw the name further down my list. I responded, "Yeah, I will take care of it." Why did they call? Did I need to expedite that one? I should not have asked, since I saw the condescending look he gave when someone asked a question he viewed as stupid. His face curled into a sarcastic smile and he said, "Yes, expedite it pretty please with cherries on top. Not sure why I have to ask. You gotta be careful. Clueless underwriters might be at risk. Gotta stay on top of it and be proactive." He shot me one last annoying grin and walked away. I was upset by the indirect, if not insulting, exchange. Langdon was always a little passive-aggressive, but today seemed like it was worse than usual. Then, as if sensing my distress, I heard Matilda faintly in my mind, and I knew she would not let the verbal slight go unanswered. I tried to tell her to stop, but she was already away. I prayed she would not do anything too crazy. After 5 minutes I felt her presence stirring again. I bent down and unzipped my backpack, and I saw her face with a rictus of anger etched plainly on it. I was considering asking her what she did, but she spoke first. "He is a bad man. He lies a lot. He lied to his family. He told them he did not know that woman. Then he hurt her and made her go away. He lies to his friends. He steals from them and hurts them too. He also lies to his employees. He is lying right now. He knows something he is not telling you or your friends here. He knows that the company is doing something called a merge, and that all of you will be laid off a month from now. He is the only person who will be moving on to the new company. He was not going to tell anyone until it was closer to the time, and he would be forced to. My heart sank as I digested what Matilda had told me. That bastard knows we are all going to lose out jobs, and he was going to string us all along with hardly any warning. I felt myself getting angry at the revelation, and I immediately forgot what happened when Matilda knew something. Or someone that made me angry or unhappy. I had to get out of there. I was panicking at the prospect of losing my job, and I did not know what might happen if Matilda recognized that and lashed out at what was making me upset. I stood up and started walking out. I ignored my coworkers' questions at what was going on. Unfortunately, Mr. Langdon was near the door. Having come back inside from an apparent phone call, he put his phone away and regarded me. "Where's the fire? I thought I said expedite the Kelso account. Not take a coffee break only an hour into your shift. You know it's this kind of attitude that..." I cut him off and got directly up in his face and told him, "Why don't you just fire me? Or were you waiting for another month to just make it easier and get rid of all of us at once?" His face turned white and he had no words to respond. The fear on his face validated the truth of what Matilda had said. He really did know, and he was not going to tell any of us. He stuttered for some response, but I brushed past him and tried to block the inevitable question that perforated my mind shortly afterwards. Can I make the bad man go away? He seems very heartless, but I am sure there is a way I can find the truth. Find his truth that makes him feel so bad that he just goes away, forever. I found that my anger at the situation dulled the horror of Matilda's threat more so than the last few times she offered to help. I admit I almost made no effort to stop her, but I just managed a response of, "No, it is not worth it. Don't use his truth to make him go away. Thank you for the offer, Matilda. I just need to go home and start brushing up on my resume." I heard her acknowledgement and she said, "I promise I won't make him do it." I realize now, I should have been more specific. When I got home, I collapsed on my couch. I knew that at some point I would need to get my computer and start looking for a new job. I did not have a lot of time left, and I was not expecting to have to be looking so soon. Later that evening, I was almost through processing my situation and trying to do something about it. Just then I got a call from an unknown number. I was shocked when I answered and I learned it was the police. My jaw almost hit the floor when I learned that I was being contacted for a statement and witness testimony for a crime that occurred at my work. Apparently, earlier that day there had been a homicide. The victim was of course my boss, Mr. Langdon. The suspect, currently in custody, and the reason for the call was to my shock. Gary. He had apparently gone berserk and had stabbed Mr. Langdon 32 times with a letter opener. I could barely speak, and I was encouraged to come down to the police station to give a proper account if I was not able to on the phone. They had wanted to know if any of his company workers had seen Gary acting strangely that morning, or likely any other telling details that could help explain the violent and grisly outburst. After I was done with the call, I hung up and walked to the living room. I heard a soft melody humming in my head and I could tell Matilda was very happy. I walked up to her shelf and she had a broad smile on her face. I asked her directly, "Why did you lie to me? Why did you kill Mr. Langdon?" Matilda did not respond at first, but the humming song had stopped. I felt an odd static in the air and I looked back as I heard a light bulb explode in the kitchen. When I looked back, there was an odd look on her face again. It looked half triumphant and half guilty. She spoke finally and said, "But I didn't lie. I promised I wouldn't make him do it. I did not have him do it. I just showed the truth to all of your coworkers. Then after that man, Gary, the one with the happy prostitute friend, he is the one who did something about it. So, like I said, I didn't lie. I never lie. That man was bad. He lied. Worse, he lied to my friend. I would never lie to my friend. I just want you to be happy." I couldn't believe it. The rationalization was hideous, but technically true. I had no idea what to do about her. I realized it was finally time to get some answers about where my friend really came from. I resolved to go back to that antique store and see just what the hell Matilda was and where she came from. I woke up feeling exhausted and drained. I had slept poorly and dimly remembered more strange dreams from the times I had managed to sleep at all. Dreams of many voices speaking to me from seemingly nowhere. Confusion, loneliness, and one other being besides the faces that would come and go and leave and stay. I could not make out the face, but I kept thinking of a yellow dress and a name, Ruby. When I forced myself up and out of bed, I almost panicked at the time. Then I remembered I had essentially lost my job and could sleep in if I wanted to. At least for now. I heard a soft morning tune being hummed at the edge of my perception and I knew Matilda was awake. Assuming she ever slept, that is. I had kept my word and let her sit on a shelf in my bedroom, and I was afraid that her proximity had worsened the bizarre dreams I was having. I felt a strange and profound sense of empathy and sadness for her. More still when I recalled the feelings of loneliness and the constant befriending and then abandonment of so many faces. So many people. I reached out to her with a soft, "Good morning, Matilda." The humming stopped and the response was quick. "Good morning, my friend. I hope you are okay. You seem like you had a rough night. I think some caffeine would do you well. Did you want to go to the kitchen and have one of your coffee drinks?" I finally looked over to the doll I was speaking to and saw Matilda smiling ear to ear as she spoke. "Thanks for your concern, Matilda. I will be okay. Actually, I needed to go to the store today. So, I hate to say it, but I need to leave you here for just an hour. The shop doesn't let people take backpacks in since people might steal stuff. So I wouldn't be able to take you in anyway. I promise it will be a short stop and I will be right back." "Okay?" There was a considerate moment and then she spoke again in a dejected and sad tone. "Oh, all right, I guess that is fine. I will be all right. Just please don't be long. Also, would you be able to leave the TV box on? I like watching people do things and it feels less lonely." I agreed to her request and turned on some daytime TV for her and closed the door, waving goodbye as I did. I had not technically lied. I was going to a store. Just that it was the store I had purchased her from. Truth Antique was open now and I was going there with some questions that the strange old woman who worked there might hopefully be able to answer. I arrived early, right when they were opening it seemed. I saw the familiar old woman unlocking the doors and turning on a flickering open sign. I thought it was good that no other customers seemed to be waiting to get in. I needed some of her time to get some questions answered. Whatever the true nature of Matilda was, this woman knew something about it. I rushed toward the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of old wood and mothballs assailed me as I entered. I walked further in, expecting to see her close by, since I had just gone in right after she had unlocked the doors. Surprisingly, she was nowhere to be seen near the front. I did not know how she could have moved so quickly, but I started walking around, trying to find her. The place felt different than before. I thought I remembered it being smaller. Yet as I walked, trying to find the shopkeeper, I felt like I was getting turned around and lost in the area I had once perceived as small. The effect was made worse by a strange thumping sound I started to hear. It was distracting me from looking for the shopkeeper as it started to get louder and louder as I walked. Eventually, it sounded like someone was beating a drum incessantly. I raced along trying to find the odd noise's source. I had finally come to an area I had not been before. The noise was very loud and I figured it had to be originating here. I stood in an odd section of the store with disturbing, almost occult-like paraphernalia. An ornate little chest seemed to be pulsing with some sort of barely restrained energy, and I realized the thumping sound seemed to emanate from the box. It did not look like it was physically moving enough to make such a racket. Yet the sound pulsed in my head. It reminded me of how Matilda spoke directly into my mind, and I feared that this object was also trying to communicate something to me. I stepped closer and felt an odd sense of calm wash over me. Then almost all my apprehension about the box had vanished, and I felt the overwhelming urge to open it and speak to the spirit it contained. If Matilda was friendly, then why not? I moved closer, compelled to open the box when a voice called out loudly, "Please step away from the box, sir." I snapped back to my senses and a wave of dread washed over me as I looked at my hand just inches away from the ornate little chest. I suddenly realized it would be a terrible idea to open the box, which I had just noticed had a palpable aura of discomforting energy radiating off of it. I stepped back as instructed and pulled my gaze from the terrible chest. Looking back, I saw the shopkeeper. She addressed me again. "You are welcome to purchase the Dybbuk box here, but I will have to insist you don't open it on the premises. They are a dreadful mess to clean up if they hit an area with lots of foot traffic and people to attach to." She chuckled and looked me up and down, then a gleam of recognition appeared in her eyes and she spoke again. "Oh, you are the one that bought Matilda. That's right. How is she doing? I hope you are not here to tell me that you want to give her back. The poor thing just wants a home. But too many people just can't seem to handle the truth. Is that it? You can't handle the truth." I stepped back from the exclamation and then she burst into laughter and then continued. "Oh, I'm sorry. I did not mean to startle you. It's just a movie reference. You know, A Few Good Men? Anyway, what can I do for you today?" I brushed off my earlier concern and decided to just ask her directly. "No, I am not here to return her. But I did need to know. What is Matilda really?" There was a brief pause and the shopkeeper's expression took on a bemused look. She considered her answer for a moment and then responded, "Why, Matilda is many things. A doll, a friend, a work of art." I was annoyed by the answer. She clearly knew what I meant but was choosing to be evasive. No, I mean, what is she besides a doll? I know she has a doll body, but I have never seen any dolls do what she can do. Is she some sort of spirit? What does she really want? You must know. You must have heard stories of what she had done in her previous homes. She seems very comfortable killing those who lie about anything and everything. Please tell me. She laughed again and responded, "Oh yes, she does really hate liars. But who doesn't? I am guessing that you found out that about her firsthand?" She chuckled again and continued, "But to answer your question, what she wants, if a friend, simple as that, a true friend, one who won't lie to her, one who won't leave her like all those others did. The constant abandonment has been hard on her. I would keep her, but I have to watch the other one." I saw her shift uncomfortably and her normal bright smile vanished briefly. I considered what she said about the other one. Then I remembered another question I had. "Who is Ruby?" I asked, almost anticipating the answer I received. The shopkeeper looked concerned but decided to answer all the same. "Ruby is Matilda's sister. You likely saw her when you bought Matilda. She is slightly more difficult than her sister." I saw her flinch and sniff the air, like she was smelling for something. She looked back to me, lowered her voice considerably and said, "Sorry, just making sure nothing is burning. Ruby has well, let's just say a fiery temper. I may as well tell you, since you deserve to know, as Matilda's friend and keeper. The two arrived together as a pair 3 years ago. I used to try and keep them together, and after selling them a few times, I had to stop since the results were problematic." I asked her, "What do you mean problematic?" She grinned again and said, "Well, to put it bluntly, they kept burning down people's houses and killing the people who were supposed to be keeping them." I gasped at the admission, but she held up a hand to cut me off and she resumed, "I know what you are thinking. No, I did not know it would happen. I just wanted to keep them together. But when they are together, there is a problem. See, Matilda is the calmer of the two, but she can read people's thoughts. Ruby is more aggressive, but she does not know what people are lying. The problem is when they are together. Then often the result would be Matilda telling her sister some secret that incenses her sister, and then, well, then things end up going down in flames. Figuratively and literally, I end up having to retrieve them. Or they do what they often do and find their way back here. I realized I had to separate them and try and let them be in the world apart and find new families. I thought maybe their worst aspects could be tempered by finding people that could give them what they need, while not letting them feed off of each other's worst impulses and continue killing. Yet time and again they would come back. Never just the right fit. Ruby has challenges, but I will find the right home for her one day. But for Matilda, maybe I already have. You know she is a kind soul, don't you? She might kill the liars, but she has a good heart. Just give her a chance." The shopkeeper held her hands together and looked almost pleadingly. Then she turned around and I thought I heard her mutter a colorful string of language. Oh no, I think Ruby heard her sister's name. She has been upset ever since I sold her, even though it is for the best. Ruby gets angry when Matilda is sold, and she remains. You might want to leave. If she is angry, the shopkeeper was cut off as a brilliant pyre of light and flame burst into being in the center of the store. The conflagration incinerated 2 rows of items, and I stared in shocked silence at the shelf I had found the dolls just days ago. On it there sat the doll in the yellow dress with the crack on its face. Its red hair was brushed back away from the grimace of anger it wore on its face. I did not know what I would do next as the voice spoke and the declaration was made clear. "Hello. My name's Ruby. You are going to bring me to my sister." I swallowed hard and knew I would not likely have the option to decline. The flames licked at the shelves around Ruby, casting an eerie orange glow across her porcelain face. Her eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire as she stared at me intently. I felt rooted to the spot, unable to look away from her piercing gaze. "Well?" Ruby demanded, her voice echoing in my mind. "I am waiting." I glanced frantically at the shopkeeper, hoping she would intervene, but she had backed away to the far corner of the store. Her eyes were wide with fear as she watched the scene unfold. I don't think that's a good idea," I stammered. "The shopkeeper said you two shouldn't be together. It's dangerous." Ruby's eyes never change, yet I could feel the barely suppressed anger in them as the flames around her surged higher. Dangerous for who? The liars? The ones she knows have the worst intentions? I bet she would say that. She says she knows what is best for us. But she always separates us. She always tells us to sit still, to not talk to people, to be patient, and someone will come along and take us. Well, the last time I did that, she sold Matilda and left me. I knew I had little choice. I nodded shakily, feeling concerned and hopeless in the matter. Okay, I'll take you to Matilda. Just, please don't burn the place down." I glanced at the shopkeeper and she was caught between surveying the damage and looking concerned about Ruby. I caught her eye and she looked grateful, but also a bit helpless as to what to do about the situation. When I looked back at her, Ruby's expression softened slightly, though the flames continued to dance around her. "Good. You made the right choice. Now pick me up and let's go." With trembling hands, I reached out and grasped Ruby. Despite the fire surrounding her, she felt cool to the touch. As soon as I lifted her from the shelf, the flames extinguished themselves, leaving behind scorched wood and melted plastic. I turned to the shopkeeper, who was still pressed against the far wall. "I'm sorry," I said weakly. She shook her head, a grim expression on her face. "It's not your fault. Just be careful, and good luck. You're going to need it." I clutched Ruby tightly as I made my way out of the antique shop, my heart pounding in my chest. The bell above the door jangled discordantly as I pushed it open. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, the normalcy of the quiet street felt surreal after what I had just witnessed inside. As I walked to my car, I could feel Ruby's presence intensely, like a barely contained inferno. Her porcelain body remained cool, but there was an unnatural warmth radiating from her that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I fumbled with my keys, nearly dropping them before managing to unlock the car door. "Careful now," Ruby's voice echoed in my mind, tinged with amusement. "We wouldn't want any accidents, would we?" I placed her gently on the passenger seat, noting how the faded yellow of her dress seemed to be unaffected by the fiery aura she radiated. I couldn't help but question how someone could have taken this doll home without realizing there was something strange about her. She seemed like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode at any moment. After the brief drive, we arrived back at my house and I felt a sense of unease at the thought of bringing these two to each other. I stepped out of the car and helped Ruby out from the passenger seat. The heat that had surrounded her earlier seemed to have dissipated, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was connected to her current mood. As I looked at her face, I noticed that she was now wearing a smile. Despite the hairline crack on her porcelain features, there was a genuine warmth in her expression that made me slightly less uncomfortable around this doll with pyrokinetic abilities. As I approached the front door, Ruby nestled in my arms. I could feel a palpable tension in the air. My hand trembled slightly as I turned the key in the lock, pushing the door open with a creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet morning. The moment we crossed the threshold, a change came over Ruby. Her porcelain body seemed to vibrate with excitement, and I could have sworn I felt a faint warmth emanating from her once more. The air inside the house felt charged, as if filled with static electricity. "Matilda?" I called out hesitantly, my voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, a joyous cry echoed through my mind, startling me so much I nearly dropped Ruby. It was Matilda's voice, suffused with an emotion I had never heard from her before, pure, unbridled happiness. "Ruby, Ruby," Matilda's voice cried out in my mind, filled with joy and excitement. "You're here. You're really here." I walked into the living room, where I had left Matilda on the shelf. Her painted face was beaming with the widest smile I had ever seen on her. As I approached, I could feel an intense energy building between the two dolls. "Sister," Ruby's voice rang out in response, equally elated. "I've missed you so much." I gently set Ruby down next to Matilda on the shelf. The moment they were side by side, a strange sensation washed over me. It felt like the air in the room was vibrating, charged with an otherworldly power. The two dolls seemed to glow faintly, their porcelain bodies emanating a soft light. Matilda spoke first. "I was afraid I would never see you again. Our friend at the store said we had to be separated for safety." I knew she was not lying. I am so glad that my new friend here trusts his safety and is willing to have us both. Her voice was choked with emotion, a resonance that echoed deep within me. I stood there, transfixed, as the space between the dolls seemed to pulse with their combined energy. Ruby's fiery aura flickered in tandem with Matilda's serene glow. "I won't let anyone separate us again. Not like before." There was a fierce determination in Ruby's tone, one that sent a shiver down my spine. I did not want to get on their bad side. An unsettling chill washed over me as I considered the implications of their bond. I had no idea how to proceed at that point. Ruby spoke again, breaking my contemplation. "You know," Ruby said, her voice somewhat relaxed now. "We need a true friend, someone who will stand by us when the time comes." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean when the time comes?" Ruby's laughter felt like it echoed through the room, carrying both a sense of joy and warning. "When it comes time to decide if we will stay with you. Remember that so many others have deceived us and broken our trust. All we ask is for honesty from you. It's as simple as that. And if you are not truthful, the truth will come out like fire, burning away any lies. Now that Matilda is back with me, we will know, we can see, and we will take action." I was speechless and just sat there and nodded. I couldn't say no. But I guessed that as long as I told the truth and never tried to lie to them, I might be okay. Though their prospect of Ruby burning my house down made me wince. My thoughts were interrupted by a loud knocking on my door. The mental discourse of the dolls grew quiet. I went to the door and opened it. It was my neighbor, Glenn. His face was twisted in anger as he confronted me, saying, "Have you been talking to my girlfriend? She knew things that she couldn't have known unless someone was spying on me. I figure it's because of our noise complaints. You're always so passive-aggressive about it." I was taken aback by his accusations, after all that had happened between us, including him stealing my packages. He had the audacity to blame me for his infidelity and his girlfriend leaving him. I stood my ground and retorted, "I have never had a conversation with your girlfriend, but maybe she has good reason to distance herself from someone who steals and cheats." My grin may have been sarcastic, but it was clear that I had hit a nerve. He was here for revenge, and he didn't seem to have anything left to lose. It dawned on me that I may have made a mistake in provoking him. His gaze sharpened and he moved closer, clearly angered by my words. Before I knew what was happening, I was on the ground. Glenn had punched me in the face and I fell back into my own house and he stepped in. He looked like he was going to crouch down and continue pummeling me. But he saw the dolls on the shelf and laughed. "You collect dolls? Man, you are weird." In that moment, the atmosphere thickened, and a palpable tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Matilda's porcelain brow was furrowed. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto Glenn with an intensity that sent shivers up my spine. Ruby, too, seemed to sense the rising threat, her vibrant red hair flickering as if caught in an unseen breeze. "Be careful," Matilda warned softly yet firmly, her voice barely above a whisper. "He is a bad man. A liar. His actions hurt others and now he has hurt our friend." I turned to Ruby and her face was in a rictus of anger. Her mental declaration was instant and forceful. "You." I knew this was going to end badly. She had screamed into my mind and clearly into Glenn's as well. He whirled around in a panic, clearly looking for where the voice had come from. Ruby's voice echoed again and I felt the air growing hotter around us. "Liars. Bad people. Always more. No matter how many are burned, the true ugly nature of people is revealed. Let the truth burn bright. He cannot hide from what he is." I looked to Matilda and there was a stern, accepting look on her painted face. She agreed with what Ruby was planning on doing. Glenn looked back at me, clearly freaked out by the sounds in his head. He was about to speak when he burst into a fireball. After frantically searching for a fire extinguisher in my kitchen, I finally located it and rushed back to the room. But it was too late. Glenn had already been turned to ash. I couldn't understand how the fire could have burned so intensely, leaving no trace of his body but also staying contained to where it began. The dolls sat still, their expressions somber and unwavering. Matilda's gentle voice echoed in my mind once again, pleading with me, "We are deeply sorry for going against your wishes. But he was a deceitful man. He caused harm to you and others. Please don't be too harsh on Ruby. If you give us a chance, perhaps we can all coexist peacefully." I had just witnessed my neighbor being reduced to ashes within seconds by the pyrokinetic doll sitting on my shelf. I couldn't find the words to respond to Matilda's appeal at first. I couldn't believe what I was trying to justify. But I managed to say, "It's all right. I understand. I just need some time to process everything." Her usual sweet response was, "Take all the time you need. Friend, we'll be here for you anytime you need our help." I left the room and headed to my kitchen to grab a dustpan and clean up the physical evidence of my neighbor's demise. Months have passed since that fateful encounter, and in the wake of chaos, a strange harmony had settled over our home. The police had come to question me about my missing neighbor, and I had told them the truth. I had no idea how he could have vanished without a trace. However, I omitted the details of his disappearance from my statement. I've realized that I need to find some positivity in my situation. I may still be unemployed, but I believe that with the dolls by my side, I should pursue a career where liars, grifters, and corruption were rife. I want to work in a field where only the most deceitful and corrupt would suffer consequences from the relentless pursuit of truth my loyal companions wholeheartedly support. With this in mind, maybe I will need to relocate, move to somewhere where dishonesty and corruption are the business model. Yes, I think we'll try to seek new career opportunity in Washington, D.C. With Matilda and Ruby, what could go wrong? Stay safe and remember, honesty is the best policy. Story. I knew where the bodies were buried. I went to prison for the first time when I was 19 for my involvement in an armed robbery. The guns were fakes and the gang I was part of were not much better. The whole sorry incident ended with us driving into a police car. The second time I was sent to prison was for a killing I did not commit. I was 30. The 3 men I had carried out the armed robbery with were dead. One had hung himself in his cell. One had died in another botched robbery. Most of the third man had been found in a river. I could not see any future for myself that did not involve any early grave. And then I was approached in a bar by a man who I knew by reputation. He was an associate of a local big-time criminal. He bought me a drink and explained that someone needed to take the fall for an act of retribution. That person would be protected while in prison, and when they got out there would be a tidy sum in their bank account. At that point in my life, it was a no-brainer. I asked no questions. I did as I was told. I had a very good and, presumably, very crooked legal representative, and I was convicted of manslaughter and sent to a medium security prison. It was no holiday camp, but I did my time and kept myself to myself. The prison had a small garden and I was able to spend a few hours every week working there. I got a couple of books on horticulture to learn more. I'd never done anything like this before and was amazed at how much pleasure tending that patch of land brought me. When I was released at the end of my sentence, for the first few days I missed being hunched over planting and digging and weeding. I daydreamed about becoming a gardener, about earning a living. Honestly, I should have known better. I had already drifted back to some of my old haunts and was in the bar one afternoon when I saw a familiar face. Last time I had seen him, he had bought me a drink and offered me a deal. Now, he was heading for my table with another man by his side. My nerves began to tingle. I knew who this was. I'd seen photographs in newspapers. Stories about a crime boss that the police and courts had never been able to pin anything on. One of the papers had not even bothered using the word alleged before crime boss, in their latest report. A few days later, the journalist's car was firebombed. So, yes, I was on edge and trying frantically to think if I had done anything wrong. Telling myself equally frantically that I was a small fry. The main man would not come after me personally. Surely? He settled in the seat next to mine, while his associate went to order drinks at the bar. This was not the sort of place where they came to your table, or smiled or said hi. It was gloomy and dank and might as well have had a sign over the door saying, "Abandon all hope ye who enter here." Perfect for people who liked to move in the shadows. He spoke in a low voice. "I have heard good things about you. That you are a man who can be trusted. This is a quality that is all too rare these days." Our drinks arrived. I did not dare pick mine up because my hand would shake too much. He took a sip of his before going on. "I have acquired a property with land, and I need someone to look after it. Someone like you. Someone with green fingers." Then he smiled. A bead of sweat trickled down my face. I knew I had just been offered a new job, but beyond that my head was spinning. He shook my hand and left. His associate remained. "Do you have much stuff?" he asked. "Clothes, books, an electric or old-fashioned toothbrush." I was living in a halfway house and cleaned my teeth using my fingers. I shook my head. "Good," he said. "Then let's make you disappear." I followed him outside to a waiting car. I sat in the back and peered out of a grease-stained window as the city slipped by. I had few good memories of the place and too many reminders of bad things. And was not sad when we left the outskirts and started heading out into the open countryside. The road began to rise and twist, and soon I was looking out over bleak hills that bled out into a low, cloud-shrouded horizon. There were a few skinny trees at first. Then they petered out, and there was nothing apart from brown, spiky grass and a few patches of purple heather, like fresh bruises on the face of the earth. After driving for about an hour, we reached a fork in the road. To our left I could make out metallic chimneys, 3 fat structures just visible over the hilltop. And, as my eyes focused, I could see roofs. The associate must have seen me looking at them and broke the silence that had accompanied our journey so far. "That is a ghost. It is not shown on any available maps. As best we can tell, it is a research facility for either the government or the military. Either way, they don't encourage visitors and keep themselves to themselves. We couldn't wish for better neighbors." I did not reply. A fresh bunch of questions about what exactly I had agreed to were troubling me. But I knew to keep them to myself. I had shaken hands with the boss. There was no going back. The car took the road to the right that led away from the cluster of buildings, and silence settled back into place. Another 15 minutes or so later, a small stone cottage came into view. It stood alone. The car pulled up close by, and the associate said, "Welcome to your new home. No questions. Just do." I reminded myself and stepped out of the car. The air was still, and as I looked around I could see no other signs of life. Not even a single bird. Just the associate and me. He had popped the trunk and was lifting out grocery bags packed to the brim. He put them in a pile on the ground and said, "There's enough here for you live off for a while." Then he started to get back in the car, and realizing that he was going to abandon me here, my resolve broke. "Wait," I said, "what am I meant to do here?" He grinned. "I'll be back with the first delivery." It'll all become clear then. He closed to the door, started the engine. I'll leave you to get settled in, he shouted, then drove off, leaving me. I sighed, picked up the bags and headed for the cottage. I reached the front door before I realized he had not left me a key. It had started to fall dark and it already felt bitterly cold. Hoping that I would not be stranded outside, I pushed the door. It swung open with a creak that would not have been out of place in a black and white B-movie end. Relieved, I went inside. I walked around, checking out my new home, and swearing. I swore a lot when I saw the cracked wooden bed frame and the filthy mattress propped against the wall next to it. When I opened the door of a small room which revealed a toilet bowl that stank like it was a portal to hell, I decided I would rather crap out in the open and closed the door. There was only one more space for me to curse, a kitchen cum dining room cum indoor ghetto. I shook my head, went to fetch the supplies through, and dumped them on the floor. I spent that first night in the cottage wishing I was back in prison, then dragged my aching body outside at first light to relieve my aching bladder. Dawn did not make my situation look any better. The brown grass and occasional heather looked even bleaker in the morning light, and after I did my zipper up there were no other noises. I went back into the kitchen and ate dry cereal from a box. It was the highlight of the day that followed until I heard the car. I rushed outside and watched as it pulled up and the associate and a man I had never seen before got out. I remembered what the associate had said about a first delivery and wondered what could bring clarity to my dire situation. The trunk opened and the new man lifted something out. It was something heavy wrapped in a blanket, and he let it fall to the ground before dragging it over by one end. The associate stood watching until it was next to my feet, then he strolled over and pulled back the blanket. A dead man stared up at us. There was a bullet wound in his forehead and the smell rising from him made me gag. I'd seen a lot of bad things in my time, but I had never seen a corpse before. The well of human sympathy did not run deep in the associate, and he sounded matter of fact as he finally began to set me straight about my situation. Disposing of bodies in fires and the foundations of building sites is all very well, but we've had some fallout recently when the remains have been found. So the boss had the brainwave to buy this place. No one is going to stumble across a body here. Not when it's been buried. I noticed the other man had brought a shovel from the car and was holding it out to me. Buried, I replied. But where? The associate looked around at the desolate landscape stretching as far as the eye could see. Your choice, he said, then got back in the car. They drove off, leaving me with a dead body, a shovel and a sinking feeling. Even though I was totally on my own, I kept looking over my shoulder as I dug a grave. The dirt under the grass was hard, and by the time I had finished I was coated in sweat. I used the blade of the shovel to roll the body into the ground, then covered it as quickly as I could. I had no idea what he had done to deserve this fate. And I knew I never would. The best I could hope for was to not end up like him. I went back inside and my prayers were answered when I found a pint of whiskey among the groceries. My second night in the cottage was a blank. The next morning, I was sitting on the doorstep gulping in fresh air, trying not to dry heave, when I spotted the car heading towards me. There was no sign of the associate this time. The man did not speak as he took the body in the sheet out of the trunk and hauled it across the ground. A few minutes later he was gone. Over the 5 years that followed, I lost count of the number of deliveries I buried. I never became numb to the horror of what I was doing. But I quickly approached the task in a practical way. I dug the graves closer and closer together as I realized it would be better to have as small a patch of disturbed ground as I could. There had never been a single passer-by, but I knew complacency could be the end of me. So, to cover the burial area, I created a garden. I got the things I needed for this in the same way I got the rest of my supplies. Whenever there was a new delivery, I told the man what I wanted, and 9 times out of 10, it arrived with the next dead body. Seeds, trowels and hose and twine were all brought as side orders with the corpse. I understood by then what the boss had meant with his comment about me having green fingers. This had been part of his plan all along. He was as cunning as he was vicious. And I kept doing what he wanted. As the seasons passed, I tended my garden and I hid the evidence of his murderous crimes. It was midwinter, early in the year, this year, when everything went wrong. I was preparing my garden for the spring plantings and admiring a tulip which was showing its wonderful hardiness by already appearing. When the car pulled up, I had no extras ordered, nothing to look forward to, and I stood passively as the driver got out. Went to the trunk and unloaded the delivery. He left and I chose a spot where I was planning on creating a water feature. A couple of days before, I had buried the bodies of a man and a woman there. They had been delivered together and both had been mutilated. The woman's ring finger had been crudely amputated and the man's genitalia removed. With the shovel draped over my shoulder, I dragged the new body in its sheet behind me. Here should do nicely, I said to myself. I had been speaking to myself for years. I wasn't ill in any way, but I had not spoken to anyone properly in a long time. I had no mobile phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world. I made conversation with the only person I could. Me. That was just the way it was. Not a bad place to spend eternity. I added and lifted the shovel, ready to make the first cut. The body coughed. I froze. The only sound was the wind. I was imagining things, I told myself, and brought the shovel down. The body began to choke and struggle inside the blanket. What the hell? I dropped the shovel and pulled away the blanket. There was a man inside and he was very much alive. Dried blood caked the front of his shirt and he was staring up at me. He gulped and then a fresh wave of racking coughs convulsed his entire frame. I stood there open-mouthed. Whoever had carried out this murder had clearly not seen things through to the end. And now I had a major problem on my hands. If the associate had been there, no doubt he would have told me to finish the job. The man had no fight in him and a shovel was as good a blunt instrument as any other. I could not, though. I will never, be a killer. Thankfully, nature seemed to be stepping in. The man was beginning to choke, his skin darkening as he was being starved of oxygen. I should go inside, I thought. Put the kettle on, and by the time I got back he would be dead meat. Problem solved. I could bury him and then decide which seeds I wanted next. But no, I couldn't walk away. Stupid, 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 I said to myself as I knelt down and turned the man on his side. That was all it took. And he started to take desperate, ragged breaths. I waited till his skin looked a healthier washed-out white, then said, "Let's get you inside." He was a skinny so-and-so, and a few minutes later we were in the cottage. I propped him up on a chair in the kitchen. All the while he looked at me through eyes screwed up with pain. I sat opposite him and asked, "What happened to you?" His lips curled into a sneer and he replied, "I am an entrepreneur. I saw a gap in the market and I supplied it." I sighed. I meant, "Were you shot or stabbed?" "I did not ask for your life story." He looked down at his chest. "A knife," he managed to say, then coughed again. This time he brought blood up. "You're in a bad way." I said, "Thank you, Florence Bloody Nightingale." He spat the words out like each one tasted more bitter than the last. He needed a doctor, preferably an entire ER's worth. But I had no way of taking him to hospital or calling for help. The only hope was that he could hang on until the next delivery, and hope they accepted returns. He coughed once more and started to convulse. I wet a cloth and put it on his forehead. Spoke gently to him. What else could I do? He seemed to be passing in and out of consciousness. Every now and then he looked at me with a puzzled expression on his face, then fell back into a restless dream-like state. It was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon when he opened his eyes and asked, "Why are you doing this?" I did not have an answer I could put into words. "Why are you helping me?" he went on. "My entire life it's just been me. No one has ever been there for me before. And tell you, I know now what it feels like to not be alone." Then his eyes closed for the last time. I sat there listening to the silence. Then I went outside. I needed fresh air, to try and clear my head, and that was when I saw the smoke. A filthy plume was rising into the sky. It was miles away, and must have been coming from the research facility. There was nowhere else it could be. I had seen nothing like it in all my time at the cottage. They must have had an accident and this was the fallout. I figured, and sat on my doorstep and watched the smoke spiraling higher and higher. As dusk edged the sky red, I realized that it was starting to head towards me. The wind must have changed and within minutes I could see the smoke drifting. Creeping closer and closer, shockingly quickly then. The air grew thick with it. I rose and went back inside, closing the door behind me. As I turned, I could see that some of the smoke had already come into the kitchen. Tendrils of it reached out across the room. Some curled around the face of the dead man. He looked at peace in the smoke's embrace. I went round the cottage checking the windows were closed. I had no idea what was in the smoke and could only hope it was not toxic. And wait for it to clear. As that long night passed, I made a decision. When I was able to do so, I would bury the man and refuse to accept any more deliveries. I would say that I needed to speak to the associate. And when I did, I would tell him I was out. I would give my word that I would never tell anyone where the bodies were buried and hope that I would be allowed to leave. And live. I felt sick with worry as it slowly grew light outside. Through the window, I could see the smoke still lingered, but I did not want to wait any longer. One last grave, I told myself, unless they made me dig my own. I went outside to retrieve the shovel. Swore under my breath. There were people in the garden. They must be investigating the smoke. I figured. The incident that had caused it. Perhaps they had come to see if I was okay? I told myself to calm it. To act as if everything was fine. I raised a hand. Gave them a friendly wave. I could not make them out clearly through the haze. But they must have seen me because they started to head my way. Ice filled my veins. I began to shake with fear. Because as they came closer, I saw the stump of the woman's ring finger, the jagged wound where the man's genitals had been. And in my guts I knew what they were. The dead, risen. I could not explain, could not reason. I could only stand and stare. The skin of their faces was mottled where their blood had settled when their hearts had stopped beating. Their gait was stiff and slow as dead muscles responded to dead nerves crying out with signals from their dead brains. Their mouths were open and guttural. Primitive sounds were carried across the air towards me. I had no choice. I said, I had to bury you. If they could hear me and understand, they showed no sign. They continued to advance towards me. And all around them, a new nightmare was unfolding. Things were emerging from beneath my lovingly tended garden. An arm, from which decaying flesh hung. Naked bone, a skull. Its jaws chattering silently. Bit by bit the rest of this skeleton stripped clean by the worms emerged, pulling itself up until it stood upright. More and more human remains followed. How many victims had I buried over the years? My mind raced to recall this as the ground appeared to dance with fragments of the dead. Everything that was coming back was moving in my direction. The woman and man, the last to be buried, the first to rise, were almost on me. Somehow, I wrenched free of the paralysis which held me and I ran back into the cottage. Slammed and barricaded the door. Seconds later the kitchen window broke, and the woman climbed inside. The man who had been buried with her clambered over her, his dead limbs writhing slowly, twisting in ways that would have been impossible when he was alive. Their skeletal kin had found their way in by now as well. The slithers of bones wriggling through gaps in the doorframe, while the still whole skeleton opened the door by itself and stood on the threshold observing the room with the empty cavities of its eye sockets. Until its skull turned to face me and it smiled. I began to scream, backed away, but there was nowhere to go. I was pressed against the wall, trapped. I had no prayers to say, no one to say goodbye to. I closed my eyes. There was a gasp nearby, a sudden intake of air. The man, I thought, who had died from his stab wound in the kitchen. I looked at where I had left him. Tears stung my eyes when I saw that he too had returned. His back was arched and he was clawing at the air. The other dead were paying him no heed. They had their hands on me now, the cold of their flesh pressing against me, brittle nail and bone beginning to dig into my flesh. The fragments swarmed around my feet, inched higher as I cried out, wept, begged for mercy. The woman rested her forehead against mine, then dug her teeth into my ear, and tore. Agony spiraled through me as she spat the bloody lump of flesh onto the ground and moved her attentions to my cheek. I felt burning pain, then the heat running down my face. This was how my life was going to end, in blood and tears. I waited for the next bite, desperate for it to be the last. But it never came. Something was pulling the risen dead away, tearing them off me. The woman was on the ground, howling with anger. The mutilated man was staggering backwards. I did not understand, and then I saw the still whole skeleton being lifted and dashed against the wall by the man who had died in the kitchen. His eyes were glazed, but his movements were swift. He was a furious storm as he moved through the risen dead. sweeping aside bone and flesh, until all of them scurried away, leaving just the two of us. "You saved me," I managed to say. I was shaking violently. "You saved me. Why?" He tilted his head to one side, and for a moment I thought I saw his eyes clear. I saw a flicker of the person he had been. His mouth opened. I realized he was trying to speak, and when he did, his words were a whisper. I was not alone. And then he turned and walked away. I have been on my own since then. There is no sign of the risen dead. They did not return to their graves. The land, my beloved garden, is ravaged. I am waiting for a car to appear and for a man to step out and open the trunk. As if nothing was wrong. As if nothing had changed. As if the dead had not walked the earth, in vengeful rage for what had been done to them, and carrying out an act of gratitude that saved my life. Story. We were told she'd recently lost a child. I looked at the report and actually did a double take. Surely there was a typo. Surely this couldn't be possible. I was about to ask the attending to double check when I heard him talking on his cell. He was speaking with the driver. They were coming from the zoo. Okay, maybe it wasn't a typo. When people surpass a certain weight and size, they no longer fit on our most heavy-duty, no pun intended, scales and devices. To take her weight, they used a scale used to weigh bears and such. That's where I was stuck. She was over 550 kilograms. I've had heavy patients before. 200 kilograms? No problem. I probably see them once every other month. Maybe more. 300 kilograms? I've seen a few. Maybe half a dozen over the years. 400 kilograms? Twice in 10 years. This was the heaviest. I try to remain unbiased when it comes to my patients. I've been a nurse for a decade now, and the last thing I need to do is to judge someone before I ever see them. Well, I was trying not to judge here. I continued reading through the report and checking this woman's vitals that were taken by the EMTs that responded to the call. It was bad. I'm not going to go into specifics, but she was not doing well. And her extreme weight made things almost unmanageable. I continued down through the report and got to the part where my heart sank. Claims she recently lost a child. This can be any number of things, but in this case I saw that the child was listed as her 2-year-old daughter. I have a 2-year-old as well, and I can't imagine losing my daughter. I tried to see if there was any additional information on how her daughter had died. Cancer, illness, some form of birth defect, and could find nothing else. Well, she'd be here for a while judging by her condition, so I figured I'd find out more then. She arrived and we had to use the most reinforced hospital bed to wheel her up. She completely filled it, and some of her was hanging off either side and the front. It was amazing how absolutely large she was. She spread out so much while laying down that she almost rolled off of herself if the bed shifted too quickly. It took 4 people to push the bed. I'm a male nurse. I occasionally get some flack for it. But it works for me. And it's how I met my wife. I was the only guy pushing. And it felt like I was helping several people push a broken down mid-size sedan off the road. It was hard, and we had a little ways to go before we got to her room. Mentally, I could tell she wasn't all there. She had a living will, but it basically said that we were to do everything in our power to keep her alive. Many people in especially bad shape will ask to not be saved in a life-threatening situation. I'd seen a man with diabetes who'd lost both legs and part of an arm to the disease sign a DNR at 36 and die less than an hour later. This lady was wailing about pain in her back and below her arm. I, and several others, were thinking heart attack at first, but upon hooking her up to the EKG, we found her heart to be in relatively good shape. It wasn't anything I'd want pumping blood in my body, but it was certainly in better shape than I'd expected. She then started sobbing about her baby girl. I couldn't help but feel saddened here. I didn't see a date for the child's death, so it could have been very recent. We finally managed to get her under sedation, albeit using an amount that would have caused anyone else to stop breathing, and began to treat her for an infection. She was brought in for a sore on her leg that had turned gangrenous and looked as bad as it was. She'd probably lose the leg, but that wasn't my call to make. Her husband had been out of town for 5 weeks, according to the one next of kin. Our patient's younger brother, we'd briefly spoken with. That was all we could get out of him. He didn't know much about his older sister, the large lady in question, and hadn't much been involved in her life after she left home. She was only 32, which made this even harder to watch. The surgeon came back and began to clean out the infection while I provided what assistance I could. Everything had gone normally up to this point. His scalpel suddenly entered a softer portion of tissue and popped a large abscess that had been festering unseen beneath her skin. The liquid that oozed out smelled of death, and it just kept coming. We finally saw that the infection in her leg was linked to a larger infection in her abdomen. I'd never seen anything like this, nor have I seen anything like it since. It was a massive infection, and meant a long recovery period for a healthy individual, and this woman was not the picture of wellness. As the surgeon drained more of the pus, he began to find bits of tissue. This meant that it was further into her abdomen than we expected. At this point, we'd been working on her for several hours and the smell was overwhelming. I hadn't noticed it before, but she had been wearing a very heavy perfume. Mixing that smell with the smell of the pus and tissue led to an even more grotesque smell that even the peppermint concentrate in our masks was fighting a losing battle against. Finally, the patient began seizing against the ventilator. This happens. It's not good. It's not the worst thing that could happen though. But when she did, she began to regain consciousness against enough sedation to give a bull elephant a hangover. She tried to sit up but only managed to flail herself a little on the bed. She was too big to move herself, but she could still try. The surgeon had to back off for a little. He didn't want her to move into the blade and injure herself further. The pus was also coming out faster now that she was moving, so he allowed what could drain to drain. We started to see more blood coming from the opening of the abscess as the anesthesiologist tried to get her under control. And finally, to our horror, we saw a small bone emerge. The surgeon, for the first time I can remember, was physically shaken and took a step back, almost to the wall. This was the same man who'd reorganized a man's internal organs after a hideous car accident when no other surgeons would go near him because he was too far gone. This was the man who'd patched up IED victims in Iraq and Afghanistan prior to coming to the hospital. To see him shaken, I began to worry. Our patient finally calmed down and went back under, and the doctor took a tentative step towards the opening. He left the bone on the ground and began to prod further and further into the wound, opening her up more with each movement. More blood and tissue began to flow. But thankfully no bone this time. Had she fractured a rib? It didn't look like a rib. Could it have been a piece of broken bone? Several things began to happen all at once. The patient's husband called in and demanded to speak with the surgeon. Apparently, he'd only just heard that his wife was going into the hospital and had already been traveling home due to the loss of his child. He would be in soon. Suddenly, someone said something about the child. The father was looking for his daughter and wanted to know who had the young girl. I replied saying that the report had indicated she just lost her child. I took this to mean she had died somehow. No one could figure out how, and no one was going to tell the father this information without knowing more. How could he possibly have been left out of the loop on that? The patient decided that this lull in the action would be the perfect time to once again seize against the ventilator. How she continued to do this with all of the various drugs in her system is beyond me to this day. But she suddenly sat up. Again I'm at a loss. And lifted one of her massive folds up in the air. Well, she tried to lift it. Her fold had apparently caused a sore or a series of sores that had healed by attaching themselves to other open sores. The sores basically created a pocket and eventually sealed that up as well. The surgeon was still trying to attack the infection when he suddenly came to something hard. I could see his scalpel fail to penetrate what looked like flesh. And he backed up again, this time pale as a sheet. He then saw what was happening and actually threw up. He ran from the room. I looked closer and saw that he had found another bone. One that shouldn't be there. The patient loudly began to wail. The anesthesiologist was about to give up as nothing he could do would keep her down without killing her when the patient suddenly stopped wailing and said very silently, "I found her." Everybody basically stood there for a few seconds in dumbfounded silence until a man suddenly burst into the operating room and screamed at the woman, "Where's Maggie? What did you do with her?" He was then promptly apprehended by our security guards as he'd knocked out a nurse to get into the OR in the first place. He began babbling about the last time he'd spoken with his wife and daughter at the same time nearly 5 weeks ago. Right after he'd left for business, we realized this was her husband. My brain began to piece things together before I could really comprehend the situation unfolding around me. And, at first I refused to accept it. The smell in the room began to get worse as the patient continued to pry her fold open and forced more and more liquid out the opening the surgeon had created. Finally, she looked as though she couldn't do it anymore when I heard the most gut-wrenching, sickening sound. The unmistakable tearing of human flesh. I had to leave the room. It was too much for me. I stepped out where the doctor was and he looked shell-shocked. He had the 1,000-yard stare. And was leaning against a wall coughing and periodically vomiting into the trash can beneath him. I was pretty sure I knew what was happening, but I wanted to hear it from him as well. Some sort of awful confirmation. He simply waved me off and shook his head as he leaned further into the trash can and threw up whatever was left in his stomach. I found the husband handcuffed to a chair, which was secured to the floor, waiting nearby. It was generally where convicts sat if their immediate family was having a high-risk procedure, or where unruly patients, guests sat while we waited for better accommodations for them. He was sobbing. He looked at me and recognized me as one of the people from the OR. She was still breastfeeding her. I know 2 is kinda old for that. But our daughter had digestive problems and couldn't handle too much food, not like her mama. I'd set everything up for her to take care of the baby. I made pulleys, arranged for people to check on her, and set up a phone so I could see them both with my own eyes. After just a few days, my wife started turning away the help because she said she didn't need it. The calls stopped coming as frequently, and it was only my wife. I knew something was wrong. But it was always after our daughter's bedtime, so I didn't know what. She just loved to climb on and around mommy. She loved to climb. She'd gotten stuck before, but she always got out. I guess this time maybe she fell asleep. He sobbed as a police officer walked through the door and began to remove the handcuffs so he could be led to a car. I ran back to the OR. This couldn't be happening. The surgeon still hadn't returned and another had been paged for. But no one would go near the patient. Even the anesthesiologist had stopped trying to put her back under. She was smiling a smile that would have made the Cheshire Cat jealous, and cradling something small in her arms while rocking it back and forth. She was muttering something very softly under her breath. I moved in slightly closer to try to figure out what. I probably should have stayed back. Mommy's got you. Mommy won't lose you again. You've been found and Mommy's so happy. Mommy didn't mean to hurt you. Mommy loves you. I still couldn't see what she was holding, though I knew deep down what it was. I was just hoping I was wrong. I edged another foot closer, and a few of the people watching the situation made to warn me, but they were too late. The patient leaned towards me and swung one of her massive arms at me in an attempt to open-handed slap me across the face. Luckily for me, I have a pretty swift reaction time and was able to move out of the way even as I felt the wind from her hand wash over my face. I could, however, smell the air that it generated, and it wasn't pretty. Then I saw it. Her arm safely out of the way, I could see a small blackened, decomposing child. She was tucked neatly under the arm and pressed tightly against this woman's breast. She was feeding her. The anesthesiologist finally came to his senses and, against all medical protocol, I saw him dump another bolus of sedation into the patient. She started to slow down her movements. I could see her eyes fighting to stay open, and finally her head slumped forward and she went limp. Her arm slowly slid away, revealing the deceased child, who, even in death, seemed to be clinging to her mother. As we approached to begin to treat the woman again and reassess the situation, she opened her eyes one last time and muttered something very softly. I couldn't make it out at first, but finally I realized she was saying a prayer. I'm not Catholic, but I have family that is, and I thought I recognized it as a variation of a prayer to Saint Anthony, patron saint of the lost. Saint Anthony, Saint Anthony, please come round. Something's been lost and cannot be found. Quote. She sighed and almost lost consciousness again, but managed to continue. Saint Anthony, Saint Anthony, I've found her in time. She once was lost, but again she's mine. Mysteries are everywhere, and some may be closer than you think. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next mystery. See you in the next story.